This was the former president's top campaign lawyer spewing some of these conspiracy theories. But as Joe was just saying, what a moment for this individual who used to be America's mayor.
Yeah, if you step back at just with that historical sweep, this is a real American Shakespearean drama, right? America's mayor, former U.S. attorney, one of the top sort of prosecutors in the country in the Southern District of New York. But also remember, he was the leading candidate for the Republican nomination for president in 2008 at one point. And by far and away, seen as possibly the next president of the United States. We all know what happened. President Obama became president. But then he attached himself to Donald Trump, and it's been a real decline since then, espousing these conspiracy theories about the election, defaming these poll workers. It really was a textbook defamation case. And now left almost destitute. He's been suspended from practicing law in New York. He's fighting disbarment proceedings in the District of Columbia. He doesn't have anywhere near $148 million. And his lawyer says this is really the civil case equivalent of the death penalty.
How about that? $148
million
that he does not have, right? What's he going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real question. He does have a radio show that gives him some income, podcast. You know, some of these right-wing figures.
An apartment on the Upper East Side.
And a $6 million apartment on the Upper East Side that's been for sale for a number of months and
not selling,
not having any takers. You know, a number of these right-wing figures and probably some left-wing ones as well in American life are able to monetize that by podcast. We see George Santos being disgraced in Congress and turning it around to a successful career on Cameo, selling short videos of himself. So who knows what the next chapter of this American life is, but this chapter seems to be coming to a pretty compelling and sad end.
As someone who's been around the radio business for a while, unless he's selling his own commercials, which it might come to, I'd love to know how much he's really making there.
Thinking about selling your show?
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Not the only story we're discussing at the table today. The House has gone. As we told you yesterday, the Senate's going to stay around a while, but there are big questions whether anything can happen between now and the end of the year on the matter of the border, which brings us to Ukraine and Israel, the supplemental funding request that President Biden put forth. I talked about that earlier today with Jim Gilmore, the former governor of Virginia and former ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He's speaking in a very concerned manner about what's happening in Ukraine. And as a former chair of the Republican Governors Association, has strong feelings about the border. Here's what he told us.
My view is that the border issue is legitimate. It's something that ought to be taken up. There's a consensus in the United States that it ought to have to be addressed. But I don't think we ought to lose sight of the reality here, that the real strategic threat to the United States rests in Ukraine. Ukraine is the pivot on which the future is going to turn. If the Russians are able to conquer Ukraine and absorb them into the Russian empire by force, violence, and atrocity, they change the entire rules of the game.
Megan Scully, the former ambassador, former governor, was obviously concerned about the situation at the border, but he sounded more concerned about Ukraine, and he's frustrated that not all members of his party feel that way. The border's going to have to come first. Can anything happen in the next week?
Well, as you said, the House is gone, likely until January 9th.
Yeah.
So the Senate is really the only game in town right now. They're negotiating with the White House, trying to strike some kind of a deal that they hope to pass the Senate. But it can't become law until it actually passes the House. The hope is that if they get on the board with a compromise that can pass, that includes both border and Ukraine, that they can get the House to go along with this early in January. The House, of course, has been incredibly resistant to any Ukraine funding, and they're really putting a hard line out there on immigration, one that even though Democrats are more willing to negotiate on this than in years past, some of the things on the table just go a bridge too far for Democrats.
Majority Leader Senator Schumer says they can actually have a vote next week. Do you really foresee a vote or just an agreement in principle between Republicans and Democrats?
Well, they need something to vote on before they can have a vote. So I think that we're certainly, towards the end of this week, the negotiations have picked up. The White House came on board with an offer that was met with some skepticism from Republicans, but it was at least a step in the right direction. I think it is certainly a reach goal to get a vote before the end of next week, But as we've seen on debt ceiling, as we've seen on government shutdowns, Congress can move quickly when they feel the urgency to do so, and they are certainly feeling it on Ukraine. The minority leader, Senator McConnell, is one of the biggest boosters of Ukraine, and there are Republicans such as Senator Thune and others in the Senate that want to see this done, in addition to Democrats.
It's interesting that we keep hearing Chuck Schumer talk about the supplemental, the original request from the White House, which has already been diced up by the House, and Speaker Johnson says they won't take that bill, but we're going to go for it anyway, remembering that's also Taiwan, that's also Israel. I wonder, Gregory, you've been steeped in campaign coverage for months now, the extent to which this might resonate on the campaign trail, which is focused so much on inflation, on the economy, on Joe Biden's age. Are voters watching this?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, voters do not vote on foreign policy unless the United States is actively engaged in a shooting war somewhere, and that's not the case here. I think Israel obviously has a lot of support across party lines in a lot of different places in the country. But it's really the border issue that's animating this for most voters, and especially Republican voters who want to see something done on the southern border. And for President Biden, the issues in Ukraine and Israel are important, and he's got to deal with them as president, but they're a distraction politically. And there's nobody who would rather get this supplemental behind him and be able to pivot back to those economic issues that you're talking about than Joe Biden, because it's really been a drag among even key parts of his constituency who believe that he is spending too much time on foreign affairs and not on domestic.